people who had the same problems that I had.
Well, what were the problems?
My lungs were all screwed up from 100 years of smoking, and I had pneumonia 4 or 5 times. So then I heard about this treatment, stem cell surgery, and a relative of mine here in Austin had it done. So I said, why not? So had it done, and it seems to be helping a lot.
Willie Nelson is 92 years old, and while most people his age are long retired, spending their days quietly at home, Willie is still on the road, still performing, still carrying the weight of a lifetime that hasn't been easy. To many it's inspiring, but when you look closer, the truth is heartbreaking. Because behind the music, behind the outlaw image, and behind the jokes he makes about cheating death, there's a man who has faced more pain, more struggle, and more loss than most of us could imagine. From devastating family tragedies, to a financial scandal that nearly destroyed him, to the health battles that haunt him today, Willie Nelson's story isn't just about music, it's about survival. And the way he's living now in his 90s may be the saddest part of all. But the story of how he became that legend didn't begin in the spotlight. It began in a tiny town in Texas, in the middle of the Great Depression. Born in 1933, Willie came into a world of hardship. His parents weren't there to raise him, so his grandparents stepped in. They didn't have much, but they gave him something priceless, his first guitar. That gift lit a fire in him. By 6 years old, he was writing songs. By his teenage years, music wasn't just a pastime, it was survival. Even then, the road ahead wasn't smooth. In the 1950s and 60s, Willie tried again and again to break into Nashville. But Nashville didn't want him. His voice was too rough. His style was too raw. Executives told him he wasn't marketable. Some even said he didn't have the look of a star. Imagine being told over and over that you weren't good enough, when deep down you knew you had something the world needed to hear. That was Willie Nelson's reality for years. Willie Nelson isn't just a country star. He's an American icon. At 92 years old, he represents the kind of living legend people rarely see in their lifetime. For some, he's the outlaw who redefined country music. For others, he's the gentle voice that made heartbreak sound beautiful. And for millions, he's simply Willie, the man who lived life on his own terms. Still, he refused to quit. Even as the doors to fame stayed closed, he found another way in, through his songwriting. The songs he wrote for others became hits long before his own name ever did. Patsy Cline turned his song Crazy into a timeless classic. Faron Young scored with Hello Walls. In a way, Willie was already shaping country music from behind the curtain, even if the spotlight wasn't on him yet. It was risky, but it worked. Suddenly, the very qualities that had once held him back became the things fans loved most. His rough-edged voice, his unpolished style, his honesty, they weren't flaws. They were the future of country music. Albums like Red-Headed Stranger and Stardust turned him into a star, and songs like Blue Eyes Crying in the Rain and On the Road Again became more than country hits. They became anthems of American life. But that spotlight couldn't stay away forever. By the 1970s, Willie was ready to break free from the system that had boxed him in. Nashville's music machine wanted polished, radio-friendly country. Willie wanted something else, something real, something raw, something that told the truth about life. Along with fellow rebels like Waylon Jennings, he walked away from the industry's strict rules and created what became known as outlaw country. And Willie's image was just as powerful as his music. The long braids, the bandana, the scruffy beard, he didn't just look different, he looked real. Fans didn't see a distant celebrity, they saw someone who seemed approachable, someone who lived like them, someone who spoke to them. That sense of authenticity, of being genuine, became his trademark. Long before social media made authentic a buzzword, Willie Nelson was living proof of it. But his reach didn't stop at country music. Willie had a gift for collaboration. He sang with Ray Charles, Julio Iglesias, Sheryl Crow, even Snoop Dogg. He blurred the lines between genres, building a fan base that stretched far beyond country music's borders. People who had never set foot in Texas still found themselves listening to Willie Nelson because his songs weren't just country, they were human. Over the decades, his output became staggering. More than 70 studio albums, countless live shows, collaborations across every corner of music. Few artists in history have matched his level of productivity and consistency. His career wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon that lasted longer than anyone could have imagined. And through it all, he kept the same down-to-earth spirit. Willie was never the untouchable superstar hiding in a mansion. He was the guy who'd sit on a porch with a guitar, play until the sun went down, and talk to you like an old friend. That connection between him and his fans is what made him more than a singer. It made him part of people's lives. That's why today, At 92, fans still hold on so tightly to him. He's not just another artist from the past. He's a living piece of history, a reminder of resilience, rebellion, and raw talent. When people look at Willie Nelson, they see the American dream with all its struggles, triumphs, and contradictions. But here's the part that makes his story bittersweet. While his legacy shines brighter than ever, his reality in the present is far more complicated. Because behind the music, behind the legend, lies a 92-year-old man whose life now looks very different from the fearless icon the world remembers. And that's where the story takes a turn. The first major concerns came more than a decade ago. In 2012, Willie canceled several shows after struggling with breathing problems. At first it seemed like a minor setback, the kind of thing any older musician might deal with, but it kept happening. Over the years, canceled performances became a recurring theme. In 2019, he announced he was cutting short his tour because of a breathing issue. He returned to the stage not long after, but fans couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Willie might not admit it, but his body was telling a different story. Rumors of emphysema spread quickly. Some said it was years of smoking catching up with him. Others speculated that the constant touring, the stress of travel, and the late nights had taken their toll. Willie himself admitted at one point that his lungs weren't what they used to be, and he eventually gave up smoking altogether, switching to edibles and other forms of cannabis instead. For a man who once bragged about outsmoking Snoop Dogg, that decision spoke volumes. For decades, Willie Nelson built his reputation as the man who couldn't be slowed down. He toured endlessly, recorded album after album, and seemed to live life with an energy that defied his age. But as the years caught up with him, cracks started to show. The same fans who once admired his resilience began noticing signs that the road was finally wearing him down. And now at 92, his health has become one of the most talked about and most worrying parts of his story. Fans who attend his concerts often describe a mix of emotions. On one hand, they're grateful to see a legend still performing. They cherish every note, knowing it could be the last time they hear it live. On the other hand, they can't help but feel uneasy watching him push himself. Some say they leave the shows inspired. Others say they leave with a heavy heart, wondering whether this is really how they want to remember him. But even when he adjusted his lifestyle, the whispers didn't stop. Every new appearance sparked fresh speculation. Fans pointed to his thin frame, his slower movements, the way he sometimes struggled to deliver a song the way he used to. Videos from live shows circulated online, with viewers debating whether Willie still had the strength to keep performing. Some insisted he looked fine for his age. Others argued he looked frail, even fragile, as if music itself was the only thing holding him up. And that's part of what makes this stage of his life so heartbreaking. For most people, 92 is an age of rest. It's a time to sit back, reflect, and enjoy whatever years remain in peace. But for Willie, rest has never been an option. Performing isn't just his job, it's his identity. Music is what's kept him alive, but it's also what demands the most from his body. And the older he gets, the more dangerous that balancing act becomes. The conversation around his health isn't just about his physical condition, it's about the legacy he leaves behind. Willie has always been larger than life, the rebel who outlived expectations, the outlaw who refused to quit. But now each performance raises uncomfortable questions. Is he still on stage because he wants to be? Or is he on stage because he feels he has to be? And if his health continues to decline, how will fans remember him, the strong, unstoppable icon, or the fragile man struggling to hold on? Even those closest to him have hinted at the delicate balance he's facing. In interviews, Willie has joked about death, saying he's lived longer than he ever expected. But behind the humor is a man who knows the reality. Time is no longer on his side. Every show, every tour, every song could be his last. And that knowledge lingers in the minds of fans who watch him today. What makes it even more complicated is Willie's stubbornness. He has admitted before that he doesn't like the idea of slowing down. To him, stopping would mean giving up. And giving up is something Willie Nelson has never done. But pushing forward comes at a cost. His body isn't the same, and fans can see it. The voice that once carried with effortless strength now sometimes wavers. The man who once commanded stages with ease now moves more carefully, more deliberately. It's not weakness, it's age. And it's unavoidable. And while health alone would be enough to concern his fans, the reality is that Willie's struggles go far beyond his physical condition. Because the pain in his life hasn't only come from his body, it's come from his heart. And what happened in his family left scars that even music could never heal. Still, even in this fragile state, Willie's determination inspires many. He proves that passion doesn't retire, that music can keep someone going long after their body tells them to stop. But that inspiration is mixed with sadness, because while his refusal to quit is admirable, it also forces fans to watch a slow decline. They don't just see the legend, they see the cost of refusing to step away. The truth is, Willie Nelson's health isn't just about him anymore. It's about the people who followed him for decades, the fans who grew up with his songs, the generations who see him as more than just a singer. They worry about him, they want to celebrate him, but they also don't want to watch him fade in front of their eyes. It's a painful contradiction, one that plays out every time Willie steps on stage. For all of Willie Nelson's struggles with his health, nothing has left a deeper scar on his life than the pain that came from within his own family. Fame, fortune, and a legendary career could never protect him from tragedy, and one loss in particular would follow him for the rest of his life, shaping not just the man he became, but also the music that millions still hold close to their hearts. In 1991, Willie's world was shaken to its core. His son Billy Nelson died suddenly at the age of 33. For a father, losing a child is something words can barely describe. For Willie, who was already carrying the weight of a demanding career and public life, it was a heartbreak that cut too deep to ever fully heal. Billy had lived a life in the shadow of his father's fame. Like many children of celebrities, he struggled with the expectations that came with the Nelson name. Friends described him as a talented, sensitive man who often felt the pressure of being Willie's son. That kind of weight can crush even the strongest spirit. And while the family did their best to protect him, Billy's demons eventually caught up with him. What made the tragedy even harder was the timing. Willie was already dealing with financial turmoil in the early 90s. The infamous IRS scandal had left him millions in debt, forcing him to sell off properties and belongings to pay what he owed. On top of those public struggles, the death of his son added a private grief that money or fame could never fix. For Willie, it was like carrying two battles at once, one for his livelihood and one for his heart. When news broke of his passing, fans were stunned. For decades, Willie had been the image of strength and resilience, a man who bounced back from rejection, financial disaster, and personal setbacks. But this was different. This was personal. The public saw a legend, but behind the scenes was a father devastated by the loss of his child. Willie rarely spoke about Billy in detail, and when he did, it was often with quiet sorrow. He once admitted that music was the only thing that gave him a way to process the pain. But anyone who's lived through loss knows the truth. Some wounds never close. They simply become part of you. And it wasn't the only time tragedy struck the Nelson family. Willie has endured the loss of siblings, friends, and fellow musicians who were part of his closest circle. Each passing chipped away at the image of Willie as the unstoppable outlaw. The truth was, behind the braids, the bandana, and the music, he was a man who had endured more loss than most could imagine. But no matter how much tragedy struck, Willie did what he always did. He turned to music. Fans often say they can hear the grief in his songs from the 90s and beyond. There's a melancholy in his voice, a kind of sadness that seems to linger in every note. When he sings about love and loss, it doesn't feel like performance, it feels like confession. And that authenticity is part of why fans connect so deeply with him. They don't just hear a singer, they hear a man who has lived the pain he's describing. Even in recent years, those losses have continued. In 2017, his longtime friend and collaborator Merle Haggard died, on Willie's own birthday. The two had been so close that Merle once said, "Willie's my brother, in every way that counts." Losing Merle was another heavy blow, a reminder that time was stealing away the people Willie loved most. Still, even with music as an outlet, there's only so much healing a person can do. Willie has admitted in interviews that the grief never truly left him. He found ways to keep going: family, music, activism. But the loss of Billy was always there, a shadow that followed him no matter how bright the stage lights shined. For Willie Nelson, tragedy has never defined him, but it has shaped him. It has softened his voice, deepened his lyrics, and made his music resonate in ways that perfection never could. Every note he sings today carries echoes of the son he lost, the friends he buried, the struggles he endured. That's why his songs feel so personal. They don't come from a place of fiction, they come from a place of survival. And this is what makes the later years of Willie's life so bittersweet. Fans see him as a survivor, someone who has outlasted nearly everyone else from his generation. But survival comes at a price. Living to 92 means living long enough to lose people you love, again and again. It means carrying not only your own pain, but also the memories of those who are no longer here. For much of his life, Willie Nelson seemed untouchable. No matter the rejection, the setbacks, or the personal tragedies, he always found a way to bounce back. But in the early 1990s, he faced a challenge unlike anything he'd ever seen before, one that threatened not only his career but also everything he had built over decades. For the first time, Willie wasn't just fighting to stay relevant as an artist, he was fighting the US government. But even as fans admire his resilience, the question remains: how much more pain can one man carry? For Willie, grief has always been part of the story. And as he enters his 90s, the weight of that grief is heavier than ever. And yet, tragedy is only one part of Willie Nelson's complicated reality. Because while heartbreak shaped his emotional life, financial disaster nearly destroyed everything he worked for. And the way he handled that chapter left fans shocked, and critics questioning whether the outlaw spirit had finally caught up to him. The story behind that number was complicated. Willie's finances were being handled by accountants and advisors, the kind of people artists often rely on to manage their money while they focus on their craft. But somewhere along the way, things went terribly wrong. The IRS accused his team of making questionable investments and using tax shelters that were later ruled illegal. Whether Willie truly understood the details or not, one thing was clear: the government wanted its money, and they weren't going to wait. It started with a number so large, it sounded impossible. In 1990, the Internal Revenue Service came after Willie for unpaid taxes. The figure they claimed he owed was staggering: $16.7 million. To put that into perspective, it was more money than most musicians would see in a lifetime, and it was a debt that could have crushed anyone, especially a man who had already weathered so much personal loss. Almost overnight, Willie went from being one of the most beloved figures in country music to being the poster child for financial mismanagement. Newspapers ran headlines about his massive debt. Late-night comedians made jokes about it. Fans who had always seen him as larger than life suddenly saw a man who could lose everything. The outlaw image that had once made him cool now seemed like it might destroy him. The IRS didn't play around. They began seizing his assets: houses, ranches, recording equipment, even personal belongings. Agents famously raided his home in Texas and took nearly everything they could get their hands on. For most people, that would have been the end. The humiliation, the financial ruin, the sheer scale of the debt. It would have been too much. But for Willie Nelson, it became another chapter in his story of survival. But even with the album and the support of his fans, paying off $16.7 million was no small task. Willie spent years negotiating with the IRS, selling off properties, and making payments until the debt was finally settled. By the mid-1990s, he had managed to escape financial ruin, but not without scars. The scandal became a permanent part of his legacy, a reminder that even legends aren't immune to mistakes, or to the consequences of trusting the wrong people. Instead of hiding, Willie did what he always did. He turned to music. In 1992, he released a unique album called The IRS Tapes, Who'll Buy My Memories. The idea was simple but brilliant. All proceeds from the album would go directly to paying off his tax debt. Fans rallied around him, buying the record not just for the songs but to help their hero climb out of the hole. It was a bold move, and it worked. What made the whole ordeal even more striking was Willie's attitude throughout. He didn't lash out. He didn't play the victim. In typical Willie fashion, he laughed about it. In interviews, he cracked jokes about how he should have known better, or how the IRS was his biggest business partner. That humor kept fans on his side. Instead of seeing him as reckless, they saw him as human, someone who had stumbled but refused to stay down. To this day, there are fans who wonder if Willie's relentless schedule is partly driven by necessity. After all, touring is where artists make the bulk of their money. And for a man in his 90s, still hitting the road, the question lingers: is he doing it because he loves it, or because he has to? Still, the rumors never fully went away. Even after the debt was cleared, whispers about Willie's financial stability continued to follow him. Some speculated that he had never truly recovered, that the scandal had forced him to keep touring long past the age when most artists would have retired. Others believed that his love of giving, supporting family, friends and causes like Farm Aid, meant that money slipped through his hands faster than he could earn it. The financial scandal of the 1990s proved that even icons can be vulnerable. It stripped away the illusion of invincibility and showed the world a Willie Nelson who was flawed, fallible, and human. But it also showed his resilience. Most people would have been crushed by a $16 million debt. Willie turned it into a joke, an album, and ultimately, a comeback. And yet, while the financial scandal was a major turning point, it wasn't the only part of Willie's lifestyle that raised eyebrows. Because for decades, one of his most famous habits has been both celebrated and criticized, praised as a symbol of freedom while also blamed for the very health problems that haunt him today. When people think of Willie Nelson, they often think of more than just the music. His lifestyle has been as much a part of his story as his songs, shaping the way the world has seen him for decades. Some of those choices turned him into a cultural icon, while others left scars that are still visible in his life today. Because if there's one truth about Willie, it's this: the way he lived defined the man he became, but it also explains why life at 92 looks so difficult for him now. That decision to quit smoking marked a turning point. Fans were reminded that the things that made Willie seem larger than life also made him vulnerable. While some still associated cannabis with his free-spirited image, Willie himself was facing the physical price of those years. And in a way, that shift made his story even more human. But what was once seen as a lighthearted trademark eventually revealed a harsher side. By his late 80s, Willie admitted that years of smoking had taken a toll on his lungs. He struggled with breathing problems, and rumors about his health began to spread. In 2019, he announced that he had quit smoking altogether after realizing the damage it had caused. It was a rare acknowledgement from a man who had built so much of his identity on being unstoppable. The reality was unavoidable. Even legends can't outrun the consequences of their choices. For much of his career, one subject followed Willie everywhere: his connection to cannabis. He spoke about it openly in interviews, referenced it in his humor, and even turned it into part of his public persona. Over time, it became almost inseparable from his image. Fans saw it as a symbol of his outlaw spirit, the same rebellious streak that once put him at odds with Nashville but made him beloved by ordinary people. Cannabis, though, was only one part of his lifestyle. Another defining feature of Willie's life has been his relentless touring schedule. Most artists slow down after a few decades, choosing rest over the grind of the road. Willie never did. He performed through his 70s, his 80s, and now even in his 90s. It became part of his legend, this idea that he was always on the road again. But behind that legend lies another truth. Touring is grueling, even for young artists in perfect health. The constant travel, the late nights, the energy it takes to perform for thousands, it wears a body down. For Willie, it gave him a career unlike any other, but it also drained him physically. When fans see him on stage today, frail yet determined, they can't help but wonder whether those decades of pushing himself made his current struggles even harder. There's also the way Willie handled money and generosity. Friends often describe him as laid back, even carefree, with little concern for the future. He gave freely, supporting causes like Farm Aid and helping those around him whenever he could. That generosity made him beloved, but it also created problems. Combined with the financial scandal of the 1990s, his casual approach to money left him vulnerable. Instead of stockpiling wealth for his later years, Willie often seemed more focused on living in the moment. Admirable, yes, but costly when the years caught up to him. And yet there's something undeniably admirable about it too. Even as fans worry about him, there's respect for the fact that he never compromised who he was. Willie Nelson lived the way he wanted, no matter the risks. But that leaves us with a difficult question: was it worth it? Did the choices that gave him freedom also take away the comfort he should have had in his final years? Because the sad truth is this: every decision leaves a mark. For Willie, the marks are everywhere. In his voice, in his body, in the way fans talk about him today. Some see him as inspiring, proof that a man can keep going no matter what. Others see him as worn down, a reminder that even legends aren't invincible. What ties all these lifestyle choices together is Willie's outlaw mentality. He never lived by the rules. He didn't bow to industry pressure. He didn't live cautiously. He did things his way, whether it was his advocacy for cannabis, his nonstop touring, or his generosity with money. That defiance made him legendary. But it also means that at 92, he's paying a price. His body is frailer, his finances have been questioned, and his image as the eternal outlaw feels heavier now than it did in his youth. And this brings us to one of the most debated parts of his later years. Because some fans believe that Willie's relentless touring isn't just about passion anymore, that there may be other forces keeping him on the road, even when his body begs him to stop. And if that speculation is true, it changes the way we look at his story completely. On the surface, the idea of Willie being pressured to keep performing feels unthinkable. He's a legend, a man who built his career by rejecting outside control. And yet, whispers have circulated for years that the constant touring may not just be about passion. For some observers, the suspicion is that financial obligations, family expectations, or even industry demands are pushing him to stay on stage long after most artists would have stepped away. For decades, Willie Nelson has been the embodiment of the road. Few artists in history have toured as relentlessly, and even fewer have done it into their 90s. To many fans, it's inspiring, a sign that his love for music is so strong that nothing can stop him. But in recent years, a darker question has started to surface among the fans. Is Willie still touring because he wants to, or because he feels he has to? Then there's the reality of the music business. Touring has always been the most profitable part of an artist's career. Album sales don't bring in what they once did, and streaming pays fractions of a penny per play. For a man like Willie, whose legacy is huge but whose financial history has been rocky, being on the road may not just be about art, it may be about survival. Fans who see him performing night after night in his 90s can't help but wonder, is this his choice, Or is this the only way to keep everything afloat? The root of this speculation goes back to the financial scandal of the 1990s. That IRS battle left a mark on Willie that never truly faded. While he eventually paid off the enormous debt, fans noticed that he never stopped working. Even when his peers were slowing down, Willie was still booking tour after tour, sometimes with dozens of shows packed into a single year. Was that just who he was, or was it a necessity to keep the money flowing? The speculation grows when you consider the physical toll. Willie has canceled shows in recent years due to health concerns, sometimes at the last minute. Each time, the announcements spark worry and sadness among fans, but almost without fail the shows are rescheduled, and Willie is back on stage soon after. To some, that resilience is admirable. To others, it feels like pressure. Why not just rest? Why not slow down and enjoy the quiet? The fact that he doesn't fuels the theory that he isn't entirely free to stop. And then there's the fans. Willie Nelson isn't just an artist, he's a cultural figure. Entire generations have grown up with his music, and many people see seeing him live as a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Promoters know this. Tickets sell fast, and demand has never fully gone away. That constant pull of audience expectations becomes another form of pressure. When the world wants you on stage, saying no isn't easy, even if you're 92. Still, not everyone believes he's being pushed. Some insist that Willie's refusal to quit is simply his own choice, the final expression of his outlaw spirit. He's always lived on his own terms, and maybe this is no different. To retire would mean accepting that the road has ended, and Willie may not be ready to face that. For a man whose entire life has been about movement, about music, about sharing songs with people night after night, maybe the thought of stopping feels more frightening than the physical pain of continuing. There's also the family factor. Willie's children are part of his touring life, some even performing alongside him. That has led to speculation that the tours support more than just Willie himself. They provide income for the entire crew, the band, and his family members involved in the shows. Walking away wouldn't just be a personal choice. It could affect the livelihoods of everyone around him. That creates a situation where stopping might feel impossible, even if his body is telling him otherwise. But here's where the sadness creeps in. Watching Willie struggle through performances, his voice weaker, his body slower, leaves fans with mixed emotions. On one hand, there's awe at his determination. On the other, there's concern that he's sacrificing comfort, even dignity, to keep going. If he is being pushed, then it feels tragic. If he's pushing himself, it still feels bittersweet, because the cost is so visible. What makes this conversation even more complicated is the way Willie himself talks about it. In interviews, he often brushes off concerns, making light of his health issues and joking that he'll quit when he's gone. That kind of humor makes it hard to know how he really feels. Is he covering up pain with laughter, or is he truly at peace with the grind? Fans may never know the full answer. But one thing is clear. The question of whether Willie is being pushed to keep touring isn't just about money or health, it's about legacy. Every performance now carries the weight of being maybe the last. Every canceled show sparks fear that the end is near. And every time he returns, it feels like a miracle. That cycle of worry and relief keeps fans watching, but it also keeps the pressure on Willie himself. At 92, most people would be resting, surrounded by family, enjoying the peace they've earned. Willie Nelson is still out under the stage lights, singing to packed crowds. Whether that's his own choice or a responsibility he feels to others, it paints a complicated picture. On one side, it's inspiring. On the other, it's undeniably sad. And this tension between admiration and concern, between inspiration and tragedy, defines the way fans see him today. Because the road has always been Willie's home. But as he grows older, the question grows louder. Is it still his home by choice, or has it become a cage he can't escape? When people look at Willie Nelson today, they don't just see a musician. They see an entire era, a symbol of independence, resilience, and rebellion. He isn't just part of country music, he is country music in many ways. His story reflects the struggles and triumphs of an artist who never bowed to pressure, who built his life around songs that told the truth, even when the truth wasn't easy to hear. And yet the way he lives at 92 also forces fans to confront a harder reality. What does it mean for a legend to keep going when his body clearly wants to stop? Willie's legacy is one of contradictions, and that's what makes it so powerful. On one hand, he is celebrated for his independence. He broke away from Nashville's polished system, forged his own outlaw path, and built a career that defied the rules. He stood for farmers, for working people, for anyone who felt like they didn't belong in the neat little boxes society tried to create. That defiance made him a hero to millions. But his legacy is also marked by pain. The family tragedies, the financial collapse, the health scares, these aren't just footnotes in his story, they're central to it. They show that Willie wasn't invincible, even if he sometimes seemed that way. They remind us that the outlaw lifestyle comes with consequences, and that even legends can be broken by loss and burdened by age. This mix of strength and fragility is part of why his legacy feels so emotional today. Fans see the old man on stage, his braids thinner, his hands shaking slightly on the guitar, his voice softer than it once was. And they feel two things at once: admiration and sorrow. Admiration for the fact that he's still here, still sharing himself with the world. Sorrow for the fact that he's paying such a visible price to keep doing it. In a way, Willie's legacy is now less about his past and more about his present. For decades, people celebrated his achievements: the outlaw movement, the classics like On the Road Again, the countless collaborations, the fight for farmers. But now, much of the conversation centers on how he's living in his 90s, on what it means to see him so frail yet still performing. His legacy is becoming tied to the question of endurance. How long can a man keep pushing when everything in his body says stop? What's striking is that Willie himself doesn't seem to fear this shift. He jokes about death, about aging, about the reality of being in his 90s. His humor has always been a shield, a way to turn pain into something bearable. And that sense of lightness has shaped his legacy too. Fans don't just remember the outlaw, they remember the man who could smile through hardship, who made people laugh even when his own life was falling apart. And yet beneath the humor there's something haunting. Because the sadness of Willie's life now isn't just about his health or his struggles, it's about what it says to the rest of us. His story is a reminder that no matter how much you achieve, no matter how iconic you become, time eventually comes for everyone. Legends grow old, outlaws slow down, and the people who once seemed larger than life eventually become frail, just like anyone else. That truth gives his legacy a kind of bittersweet beauty. Willie Nelson isn't remembered only for what he was in his prime. He's remembered for still being here, for refusing to give up, for standing on stage when most men his age can barely stand at all. His persistence becomes part of the story, an inspiration and a tragedy rolled into one. Willie's reflection on his own legacy is harder to pin down. He rarely speaks about himself in grand terms. He downplays his influence, brushes off his struggles, and insists that he's just a man who loves to play music. But his actions tell a different story. By refusing to retire, by staying on the road, he seems determined to let his legacy be defined not by slowing down, but by refusing to quit. Whether that decision is admirable or heartbreaking depends on who you ask. And this is why fans keep showing up. They don't just come for the music. They come for the experience of witnessing history, of saying they saw Willie Nelson while he was still alive. They come to honor the man, to thank him in person with their applause, even if the voice isn't what it used to be, even if the performances sometimes falter. In a strange way, every concert feels like both a celebration and a goodbye. And so, when people say that how Willie lives today is sad, they're not wrong. It is sad to see a legend so frail, to see him pushed to the limits of what his body can endure. But it's also inspiring, because in his weakness, he shows the same strength that carried him through every rejection, every scandal, every heartbreak. Willie Nelson's legacy is not just about his music, it's about his resilience, about how he kept going when no one else could. Willie Nelson's story is unlike anyone else's. From the days when Nashville turned him away, to the outlaw movement that rewrote the rules of country music, to the IRS battles, the health scares, and the endless years on the road, his life has been a saga of triumph and struggle. And now, at 92, the way he lives feels both heartbreaking and inspiring at the same time. At the heart of Willie Nelson's legacy is this tension between myth and man. The myth is the outlaw, the rebel who outsmoked, outlasted, and outplayed everyone. The man is the 92-year-old who struggles for breath but still walks on stage, guitar in hand, because it's the only life he's ever known. Fans love both versions, but it's the contrast between them that makes his story unforgettable.